Yeah, roger that.
And I'm just making my way back towards the vessel along the wreck. Easy.
Okay.
Reaching the end of the cable, they turn the ROV around and come back towards the wreck. That's when they run into Q turret again. Or do they?
You know something, guys? That's not the turret we found earlier. It isn't, look. If you look at the angles there around the back, that's armour plating. No, and that's a different turret, you know? There's got to be a different one. Can you just come up a little bit there, Chris?
Yeah, sure.
I just want to have a look at, see whether it's got those holes in it that the other one did. That's a different turret. That's a different turret. Keep going around to the right there.
Okay, moving round.
That's two of them then.
Yeah. Look, it's got one gun. It's got one gun. That is a different turret. We found the other one.
We've done it.
Look, it's about 35 metres from the other turret, in a line. That's incredible.
No missing pieces.
What a day!
The discovery of the second turret completes the picture. The midship gun turrets are both lying upside down, somewhere behind the stern. It seems they fell backwards from their mountings as the ship broke into two, but they were not thrown a great distance from the wreck by a huge explosion. The wreck is the last resting place of 1,019 men. Only 6 survived the demise of the Invincible. The divers must follow the ROV umbilical line to locate the missing turrets.
There we go.
Yep.
We got them. Here they come.
We got them.
Their first task is to send up marker buoys to fix their precise position relative to the main wreck.
Let me write out something.
While Bill starts on his calculations, the next team of divers prepare to dive on the main stern section of the wreck. They are still looking for clues.
Is that a case?
That's part of a Clarkson case, yeah.
Yeah.
The ocean floor is strewn with blasted cordite cases, and Invincible's huge guns still point defiantly towards the enemy. She was one of the fastest firing ships in the whole fleet. She should not have been so vulnerable. The divers locate X turret mounted on the stern section. The roof is missing, but the two 12-inch guns remain intact. The breech on each barrel is closed. The brass is still glinting. In the working chamber below the turret, they find an oversupply of cordite cases, explosives that should have been in the safety of the magazine. For the first time, the Invincible has been thoroughly scanned and mapped. Drawing together all the new evidence may shed new light on the mystery.
What we seem to have now on the bottom is the bow of Invincible here, and it's inverted. It's upside down. We have a stern section over here of Invincible, roughly like this, with a large debris field in the middle, and two turrets back here about 75 meters aft. And what it appears that has happened is the ship exploded in the middle. The turrets fell out almost immediately. The residual portion of the ship coasted on a small distance and broke in half completely. The fact is the break in the center here is not very large. It's not very extensive fore and aft, less than I would have expected, and that tends to indicate it was sort of a slow burn as well, rather than a detonation explosion. It was really more of instead of a bang, it was kind of more of a whoof. Okay.
HMS Invincible had taken a hit amidships. The shell had penetrated the armor plating of Q turret, causing an initial explosion. Cordite stacked in her open handling passageways below passed the flash fire down a daisy chain of explosions to the inner sanctum of the ship. The final huge explosion in the magazine broke her in two, and as the sinking portions of the ship drifted forwards, the mid-gun turrets toppled out and dropped to the bottom.
There's no doubt about it. This is definitely a propellant burn. There's no way around it. Projectile hit somewhere around the turret and started a fire in the gun house. It propagated down through the gun house, down through the hoists, into the handling room and through into the magazines.
The wreck and debris of Invincible is so complete that Bill has been able to confirm his earlier suspicion. The final critical factor in her demise and the demise of others was cordite handling.
It seems to have propagated relatively slowly, kind of daisy chain fashion in some sort of arrangement. That would indicate, again, inadequacies in propellant handling or storage, and sometimes just pure bad luck.
They had laid a gunpowder trail from turret to magazine that would destroy the ship in seconds. But why? The Invincible was famed as one of the fastest firing ships in the fleet. This grew from a Royal Navy culture where swamping the enemy with shell after shell was preferred over slow, accurate fire.
If you shoot quickly, you're effectively intimidating the Germans from aiming properly at you, and you're basically protecting your ships in the process.
I actually know two old gentlemen who are now dead who served in ships in the Grand Fleet during Jutland. And they were boys seamen, and they said that in the handling room, the charges were being brought up, and they were taken out the cases, and they were stacked around the handling room. Now, this shouldn't happen.
For safety's sake, cordite was normally stored in tubular containers until it was needed. In the heat of battle, these were, quite frankly, a nuisance.
It's quite a tight fit. Your cartridge comes out there, and then you have to place them somewhere, ready for them to be moved to the other part of the ship. Well, that's all very well with a 6-inch one, but with a 15-inch cartridge like this, which you've got 4, it's a whole different ballgame.
They just discovered they could not get the ammunition out of the boxes fast enough to get it into the ammunition hoist in order to be shoot as quickly as they wanted to do. So increasingly what they do is they remove a quantity of the cordite from the boxes before shooting begins and stockpile it inside the magazine, just inside the door.
As the charges come up, they were taken in and stacked ready for the next broadside. The emphasis is, don't starve the guns. The guns must be kept firing all time. Keep them going.
But the unpacking and stacking of cordite wasn't the only shortcut being taken. With 10 guns firing every 30 seconds, and each gun requiring 4 cordite charges per round, there was incredible pressure on the boy seamen supplying the guns.
Number 1 gun is ready and loaded. Like ready, number 1 ready!
The process of getting the cordite from the magazine below up to the turret above was slow and difficult, made harder by the safety devices in place along the supply chain. To prevent flash fire traveling down to the magazines, there were shutter devices between the handling rooms and covers on the hoists, and a series of steel doors would isolate each step in the chain. At least those were the regulations.
They also had this cult, this British cult, of trying to do everything as fast as possible. And to that end, they cut every corner possible. So where there were safety doors that were meant to be kept locked or shut, they'd open them so they could get things through it quicker. Where they were supposed to only have the shell they were dealing with, they'd bring up extra shells, they'd bring up extra cordite, they'd bring up extra, you know, and they stacked it round so it would be more convenient. But it was also there for when the flash came. And when the shells got into the turrets, then flash was the enemy of the ship. It wasn't just the enemy, it was the end of the ship.
The gun crews of Invincible had been building a bomb, and they had handed the enemy the fuse. So had the crews of Queen Mary, Defence, and the rest of the Grand Fleet. The divers' new evidence from the wrecks confirms it. Failures in tactics, armor, and communication had all played a part. But the final reason they'd blown up so spectacularly, and with such catastrophic loss of life, was the careless handling of their own explosives. The Battle of Jutland had lasted 12 hours. The Royal Navy had lost 14 ships and 6,094 men. But the British Navy weren't the only ones to have suffered. The German High Seas Fleet had received a severe mauling. Her losses were great, her casualties many. 11 ships and 2,551 men. They returned, bit by shattered bit, to their safe harbours ahead of the British, whose losses, for all they looked like own goals, were enough for the Kaiser to try and claim a victory. In the absence of better information initially, the British press couldn't argue.
In fact, of course, in terms of pure numbers of ships sunk and men killed, yes, it appears to be a German victory, but that's not what fleets are for. Fleets are there for functional purposes. And Britain's functional purpose was to preserve command of the sea. And the day after Jutland, we had command of the sea in as full measure, if not more, than we had had it before.
The Germans had come out, they'd met our fleet, they got a hell of a shock. And in a funny way, the ships we lost blew up and sank and everyone was killed. The German ships got back with masses of people injured, and there was no way those Germans wanted to come out and fight the British again.
Scheer was of the opinion it was impossible for the German side to get a decisive victory against the British Grand Fleet. And he said to the Kaiser, we must introduce more and more submarine warfare. It is too risky for us to go into fleet action in the North Sea.
Britain's supremacy of the North Sea remains in place because the Germans never effectively tried to challenge it again after Jutland.
A compelling result. The blockade stood firm. And yet British ships were lost, let alone over 6,000 British lives. And the war wasn't over. Beatty was right. There was something wrong with our bloody ships. And now we know what. But why wasn't the nation told at the time? The battle moved from the North Sea to the corridors of Whitehall.
The battlecruiser people, and even the Grand Fleet, it rapidly becomes apparent to them that if they attribute the loss of the ships to ammunition handling practices, they're effectively saying that they were responsible to themselves for losing their own ships. So increasingly they start saying, well, no, the problem isn't with our procedures, it's with the ships. Anything to deflect accusations that the officers in the battlecruisers have been responsible for the loss of the ships themselves.
But to a great extent, they were, and the Admiralty knew it. An internal report was prepared that would have said exactly what was wrong on board those ships. But then a strange thing happened. Only months after Jutland, Jellicoe took over the Admiralty as First Sea Lord, and Beatty became commander of the fleet.
When Jellicoe puts his feet under the desk of the First Sea Lord, one of the first reports to come in front of him was this report saying, it's complete nonsense there's anything wrong with our ships. The real problem was with the lax cordite handling. Jellicoe takes one look at this report and he writes in one line, I do not agree with this. No one in the fleet agrees with this. The matter is closed. Signed, John Jellicoe. And of course, as David Beatty was now Commander-in-Chief, there was no complaint from the fleet.
And so the report was buried. To celebrate the battle, fountains were added to Trafalgar Square, not, as had been hoped, a second column. And to honor the commanders, a plaque was laid. A plaque that lies with unintended irony in the shadow of Lord Nelson.
It isn't the great smashing victory that everybody expects. There is criticism of Jellicoe, however ill-deserved. Jellicoe himself will be quietly sidelined. His reputation will be tarnished, and therefore he is not to become the second Nelson, as perhaps people might have thought he might become.
The rotting hulks of the mighty dreadnoughts bear silent witness to that fate.